Shalom from Jerusalem and welcome to Watchmen's Talk, a series of conversations with Israeli security experts and practitioners. Our guest today is the retired Lieutenant General Dani Halutz, the only fighter pilot to have commanded both the Israeli Air Force and the Israeli Defense Forces. General Halutz took part in Israel's wars from 1967 on, and he shot down 3 Egyptian and Syrian MiGs on his way to commanding Israel's best, most important, and most prestigious arm in the military. He was also in charge of the Air Force team in the Lavi, in the Israeli fighter plane project, which was later aborted. General Halutz commanded the IDF during the withdrawal from Gaza and during the Second Lebanon War. Dani Halutz, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Welcome aboard.
Thank you.
We are getting close to 2020, to the end of the year. This was not a particularly healthy year, turbulent, but it seems as if security-wise, Israel is in a quite good position, isn't it?
Yeah, it looks so. I think that the immediate threat that we had in the past already disappeared. So nowadays we are facing 2 main challenges. One is terror, very active terror. If we can call Hezbollah from Lebanon as a terror organization, because they are semi-military organization almost. And of course, the threat of the Iranian developing a nuclear bomb in the future. To define future is very difficult. I remember my days when I started to be the Air Force commander in 2000. They told me that within 2 years, they are almost there. So those 2 years are equivalent to those 2 years starting now and will end in 22.
So it's a constant. The Iranians are always a few years.
Yeah, the same 2 years. So someone is succeeding in keeping this constant delay in their abilities.
Do they really want to cross the threshold, or is it better for them to be there on the brink always?
I think that they are looking for staying on the edge and being able to do that once they will have their strategic alert that they need it. We have to remember that Iran started to develop it against Iraq, not against Israel. Israel was not their enemy when they decided about nuclear project. But you know, enemies are changed, and when we jumped to the front, they took us.
Twice in 1981 and then in 2007, a few months after you left office, the Israeli Air Force struck nuclear installations in Arab countries, first in Iraq and then in Syria. So it seems as if the Air Force is the weapon of choice, should the need arise for another such operation. But there is a difference between contingency planning and the decision to employ. And you have been there where decisions have been made. How difficult will it be for the Israeli cabinet, based on the professional recommendation of the Air Force and the General Staff, to implement such an operation?
I believe that the Iranian case is completely different from the Syrian one and the Iraqi one. First of all, geographically, the targets in Iran are a lot far than the targets in Syria and Iraq. Second, the nuclear project of the Iranian is spread all over Iran. It's not a single point that when you are doing it, it's over. Third, we have to understand that when we are knocking down a nuclear project, we are not knocking down the minds and heads that developed it. So it becomes more difficult. Now, when it comes to Iran, we have to understand that there is a difference between one and single strike and a continuous war against this country. For the Israeli Air Force, it's a challenge, but it's something that can be done, but I will not recommend to do it as long as we not have a must, an immediate need to do it, and to give this project for others to handle. I think that there are few superpowers in the world that they should take responsibility over such a challenge. First of all, are the Americans. I think that it within their abilities and within their abilities to handle a continuous campaign in distances that it's a lot more difficult for us to do. And not impossible, but difficult. The process that we are seeing lately in the Middle East, I think, which is delaying this operational option, not pushing it off the table, but delaying it. The fact that the Emirates and the Bahrain and I hope that Saudi will follow, and some other countries there, is facing a major problem for the Iranian, because they are isolated. In some respect, they are isolated, not physically, but mentally. Looking around and seeing that most of the countries that were, in a way, part of the bloc are not there anymore is very helpful for the benefit of Israel, for the benefit of the countries that's signing with Israel.
As part of coalition warfare.
As part of friendship relationship, which can be developed to various routes, various approaches. Yeah, part of coalition in a way, even if not military coalition, it's political coalition. And international politics plays a major role in this campaign.
In the race between offense and defense, while you were Air Force Chief of Staff and then Chief of the General Staff, the Joint Strike Fighter was being developed, and Israel got in on the ground floor and has F-35s now. It will also have a very developed refueling capability, which will enable it to strike as far as Iran and back, of course. We want to have our pilots back with the planes. But at the same time, the Iranians are being equipped with modern air defense systems, and they have very thick bunkers, or they're building their installations inside caves or mountains. So in this game, who has the edge?
First of all, we have to remember that no physical obstacle ever exists if someone is deciding to take it off. Not the Chinese wall, not the Maginot line, etc., etc., etc.
Or the Bar-Lev line.
Yeah, or Bar-Lev line, yeah. That's first. Second, I would say that from operational point of view, we have the responsibility to build the abilities to do whatever we are going to be asked by the Israeli government. That's first. It doesn't mean that we are going to recommend. I'm not in position now, but if I would have been asked, I will never recommend to do it as something, regardless of the global situation and, of course, the regional situation. There are means to penetrate everything. There are ways to overcome the air defense system. So in this respect, I don't think that I have to develop it, but everyone can understand that, it's just, lately it was mentioned that part of the agreements with the Americans is that we are going to be equipped with a 15-ton bomb, the mother of all bombs. Okay, we are not looking for the mother, we are looking for the sister of those bombs, but I think that physically it can be done.
Did you rehearse it or simulate it in a way that satisfied you, for instance, regarding casualties? Because in earlier wars, the Air Force paid a very heavy price in air crew being killed, wounded, and taken prisoner.
Anyone who will have the need to take such a decision will calculate it. But in the same word, in the same sentence, I would say that casualties are not the leading factor to take decisions which are very critical to the existence of State of Israel. That the reason why we are serving, we served, why I served. And I don't think that any of my commanders thought about casualties first when he sent me to do what I did in Yom Kippur War, in the Attrition War, etc. We have to calculate it. No doubt it has a moral impact if you are suffering from casualties or prisoners in enemy countries. So not casualties. We have to think, when we are taking such a decision, what will be the revenge action of the other side, how long it will take, when it will take, and where it will be taken. And we know from the Iranian experience that we did something and they retaliate in Argentine, they retaliate in different places against civilian targets.
And when the Baghdad reactor was hit in 1981, in 1991, 10 years
Absolutely.
later, Saddam launched his Scud missiles.
Absolutely. So we have to remember that when we are taking a decision. Saying that, I would emphasize that nothing will prevent us or stop us from doing something which is needed because it's crucial to the Israeli future existence.
But how do you calculate this equation? When is it absolutely essential? No one else is doing it. Diplomatic efforts have failed. What's the point of no return?
First of all, it's based on a long period of learning the enemy. That's first. Understanding the way he thinks about us, understanding how he's taking decisions, what is forcing him to take decision to retaliate once he is being attacked. And there is no formula. In the end, it's a decision that made or based upon many factors that the combination of all these factors brings you to the decision that that's the time.
But General Halutz, we mentioned the Six-Day War of 1967 and the Yom Kippur War of 1973.
Yeah.
There were no channels of communications with Nasser first and then with Sadat. Perhaps some secret talks with these Egyptian leaders would have spared us these wars.
Absolutely. And but we saw that when we have some secret channels, it didn't prevent Hussein from joining the 67 war and didn't prevent Sadat to launch the 73 war.
But you would recommend trying to have some talks with the Iranians?
Absolutely. If there is a way to discuss anything with the Iranians, anything, starting from oil and up to security issues, I would recommend, absolutely. I remember myself having some training in Tehran.
As an F-4
As an F-4 pilot. So I want to imagine, to continue to imagine, to dream that those days will come again.
So what is your position regarding the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which now under a Biden administration might get a new life, perhaps not in the same form, perhaps a new improved version?
I would say that trying to solve those issues in a peaceful way is completely a lot better because there is no good war. but there is an average peace.
Is there any enemy you would not talk to?
No. No. With whom to talk? With the friends? Okay, we are talking with friends. The need to talk is with enemies, to try to understand what is causing this kind of conflicts and to solve them. Any enemies, by the way, from Hezbollah in the north and Hamas in the south and Palestinian in the east and Iranian in the far east. If there is a way to discuss, talks are delaying actions. That's first, and we have to understand it. And unfortunately, in most of the cases, both sides are delaying their talks and prefer in some cases, actions. No, I prefer the other way around.
As you mentioned, you were appointed Air Force Chief in the year 2000, in April. And a few months later, we had what is sometimes called the Second Intifada. It's not the proper term, but let it pass. And one of your achievements as Air Force Chief was to adapt the Air Force to this particular war, to minimize rather than maximize force so that you could hit terrorist leaders and not have civilians being hurt with the moral implications, with the operational implications, legal, diplomatic, and so. Was it difficult to get your pilots and your officers change the way they looked at their missions in order to emphasize this particular kind of war?
First of all, when I entered my position as Air Force Commander, April 2000, as you mentioned, I thought that we are facing a new era.
Of peace.
Of peace. And 5 months later, I found myself in a big conceptual mistake, personally. I saw it as a major challenge to change the Air Force to be relevant to this kind of war. Because Air Force is not built to fight terrorism. It's not built to run after a single terrorist and targeting him. And we succeeded to do it. And I must say that the Air Force was, all levels of the Air Force was very cooperative, because they understood that it's not a question of if we are going to be involved in this campaign, it's the question of our involvement in the future needs of the State of Israel.
Let me ask you about two problems, perhaps two dilemmas, always facing whoever is building up a military force, and you were Chief of Operations and then Deputy Chief of Staff and finally Chief of Staff. You handled these problems. One has to do with the general ratio of forces within the Israeli Defense Forces: air, ground, naval, now perhaps cyber, intelligence, other needs. And the other has to do with the Air Force itself, perhaps without getting into too much detail, the manned aircraft versus the drone or unmanned aerial vehicles.
Well, first of all, there is no question that the main supporters of building the Air Force were land forces generals and not the commander of the Air Force. They understood that they have a strategic mean in their hands and they need it. That's first. And that's the reason why the Air Force received relatively more budget in order to be equipped.
You're not talking about close air support during ground operations?
No. About Air Force as a power in the hand of the Chief of Staff and the government of Israel. Quick reaction, long distances, short distances, because long are covering short as
versatile.
Well. Very versatile, etc., etc. That's first. What we saw on those years that we have to move from manned to unmanned vehicles. And the reason was that we, first of all, cost. Second, the risks that you can take. Third, we thought and we still think, and I'm happy to hear daily that the Air Force continue in this approach. All the missions that need long endurance, etc., are easier to be handled by unmanned vehicles and
loitering over the battlefield.
Yeah, loitering, waiting, ambushing, etc. It's better to do it with unmanned vehicles because, from physical point of view, pilot cannot stay in the air 24/7. Drone can stay in the air 24/7. Second, you can take more operational risk without risking your manpower. But having said so, I think that the era of manned vehicles is not over. Is not over. In the end of the day, there are missions, there are capabilities that in the long future might be moved to drones, but in the current situation, in the short future, I don't see them moving to that, because if you want to build the same capability, the drone will be more expensive in some ways.
But does it have to do also with men in the loop or the human decision making, or that could be transferred to your headquarters?
Some of it is a man in the loop, some of it. When decision can be transferred to the back, yeah, you can use drones easily. That's the main advantage of the drones. Second, you're controlling drones. It's more automated kind of control because the drone itself is not taking decisions. It's just carrying something here, there. Is fully controlled.
Dani, we mentioned that you shot down 3 MiGs during your career as a fighter pilot, but for the last 35 years, since November of 1985, there has been no dogfight between Israeli Phantoms, F-15s, now F-35s, and Arab MiGs, Sukhois, or now even Western aircraft, which they have. How good is the Arab or Iranian pilot, and what will happen if eventually there is another such engagement?
I will not grade them, but I will grade the Israeli Air Force as one of the top air forces in the world in the quality of the training and the pilots and the air crews. It's not only pilots.
Along what other air forces?
I would, in the front line, I would mention the Americans, of course. I would mention some European air forces. I don't want to insult anyone, so
German?
The Brits, the German, even the French, or we started around late 90s to train or to have exercises with foreign air forces, and we had the ability to see how we are compared to, and we found that we are in a good place.
Weren't you meeting or about to meet with your Turkish counterpart on 9/11? And shortly thereafter, not because of 9/11, relations soured. Can Israel return to being Turkey's ally, or the other way around?
It's not a matter of the Israeli will, it's the matter of the Turkish will. I don't think that we destroyed the relation. I would say in general, any country which is willing to have good relation with Israel will be happily invited, not by me, but by the government of Israel. But they have to understand that we are not to give up. We are not going to give up any of our essential needs to our future security. That without any leaks.
So you are, in general, for a territorial compromise, provided that the Palestinian entity, Palestinian state perhaps, will be demilitarized and there will be no obstacle to the Israeli Air Force flying around the Middle East. That would include Lebanon, Gaza, of course.
That's not the issue from my point of view. The issue from my point of view regarding the Palestinians is the Jewish nation need to be a Jewish nation. If we are not going to separate from the Palestinian, we are going to be a two-nation state. And that's the end of the Jewish state. That's my view. And not connected to territorial issue, to Palestinian Air Force or the Palestinian Navy. That's not the issue. The issue is the existence of a Jewish state in this territory.
Dani Halutz, a military man most of your life. Your son, too, was also a career Air Force pilot, author of Eye to Eye, available on Amazon and other places. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.